Hey guys, welcome back to the second part of the railroad guide. Here we're going to do an example build using all the things I talked about in the previous part. Go check it out if you haven't. I'll use a method of picking a starting point and building the railroad towards the destination almost blindly, with just roughly picking the way and doing some few important checks. So it's not going to be that perfect, although definitely 1,000 times more realistic than a railroad build with the vanilla game's rules. Also, I'll do all the grade and length calculations only as estimates from the top of my head, so it's a bit more faster. I'll be doing a much more precise method in some following video. I chose this area over here to build two example railroads. They will both start down here, which might later become some city downtown, and end up here up in the hills. There we go, right here. One of the railroad, the one I'll start with, is going to be a small regional or maybe cargo or even some historical railroad. So it's going to follow the shape of the terrain a bit more without building expensive long tunnels or bridges, and I'll try to minimize deep cuts and high embankments. The second one will be an expensive, recently built railroad for higher speeds, so it's going to be almost the exact opposite. No problems with tunnels and bridges, but definitely need to use big radii, curves, and low grades. Alright, so let's start with building the first one. And like I said, it's going to be like a smaller railroad. So I'm going to follow that 300 minimum curve radii, although I will obviously try to be as high as possible. And I will go for, let's say, 1% grade, because it's probably the easiest to calculate from the top of your head, obviously. Now, before I actually start building the railroad, I am going to just do a quick check. How much elevation difference do we actually need to overcome? So I'm going to build, well, not going to build, but I'm just going to draw this line, and I'm going to see what kind of elevation do we have here. So the entire distance, the straight distance, obviously, is around 4.5 kilometers and elevation of 60 meters. Now, that's obviously more than 1% grade, but since the railroad is going to be going around here, the mountains, we can definitely do it. It's definitely doable. Now, I've already kind of overlooked the terrain, so I do know if I actually switch on the topographic lines that overcoming these mountains in here, or well, not really mountains, but hills, ridges, is actually going to be quite difficult. As you can see, there's like a, well, it's not really a waterfall, but the water is steeply going down here. And as you can see from the topographic lines, this mountain or hill kind of is very steeply going up here. So I definitely need to start climbing with the railroad all the way from the station. So I will be able to, have some reasonable cuts and embankments after I reach this destination, right? So that's like a first look at the terrain. That's like a first look at the path you want to take. So as we are building like a smaller railroad, we can definitely afford to do crossings with roads. Now I'm going to pick probably around the lowest point of the road. I think I'm going to pick, let's say maybe this point on the road, because it already is a node on the road, so it's not going to distort it that much. Obviously, the road is in a curve. Now, every time you want to start somewhere and you already have like a point that you want to reach, it's always a good idea to kind of start making the railroad or any kind of connection, any kind of network at that one place, and then connect those places together afterwards. Okay, so because I kind of want to aim towards these hills in here, I am going to build like a short segment going from that railroad crossing, maybe right over here. Now, let's say I want to build it maybe like 200 meters, okay? It doesn't really matter at this point. And obviously using precision engineering, I'm going to put it 2 meters higher. Also need to switch on the straight slope, must not forget that. All right, so some 200 meters and going to go up by 2. All right, so it's going to be like a short embankment. There we go. All right, now we're going to connect this to the station. Now, the easiest way to do this, to connect two places like that, when you know the direction from the places, is to use some kind of a helping connection. Let's say I'm going to use the gravel road, for example, and I'm just going to build like a straight segment, obviously, going from the direction of the railroad, just like this. And I'm going to do like a test fit of a curve in here. And I know judging by the tangent line in here, that in order to create a nice connection, I will have to connect it somewhere around here, right? So I will mark that position on this road. Now I will clip off that excess road. And what I'm just going to eyeball this situation, right? And I think that approximately 1/3 of the entire length of this stretch of the railroad is going to be the straight segment coming from that crossing, right? So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to get the height difference between those two places. It's going to be 13 meters, and divided that by 3, it's going to give me something above 4. So this straight segment over here will have to overcome, let's say, around 4-meter elevation. So what I'm going to do now to get the height of the terrain for this node in here, I'm going to measure the height of the crossing. It's 93.35. Now I'm going to put it down, let's say, to 89, okay? I'm just going to type it in, hit enter, and do that terrain height over here. I can obviously paint it over bigger area, because then I can just hit Control Z and put it back like that. See? I'm going to do that after I'm finished. All right, so let's do this. Destroy this, we don't need it anymore. And now I'm just going to put the railroad in there, just like this maybe, and I'm going to see if I can connect it at a nice angle. Perfect, a perfect 180. So yeah, there we go. There we go. Now I can obviously put the terrain back, just like this. Once more, there we go. We created a nice first segment of the railroad. All right, move on. So over here, we're gonna continue on the sides of this hill right here, and then cross this ridge. And on the side, we're gonna continue on the side of this hill right here. I already kind of tried going here, but as you can see, it's way too steep over here. We would have to go very deep into the terrain, and we would actually end up being below the water level. So we're gonna create like a curve over here, and we're gonna kind of try to follow the topographic lines here. So I'm gonna put the railroad on the surface, and I'm just going to use the precision engineering to see where can I go. Now, this curve has 165 degrees, 166 meters, so the radius is definitely going to be more than fine. And the elevation that we can overcome with this curve is probably going to be around 3 meters, I assume. Yeah, it might be. So we're going to put the railroad, let's say, right there, okay? I'm obviously trying to be a bit faster here, so the video is not overly long. So you would probably be a bit more, let's say, cautious, and probably would calculate things a bit more to create a nice railroad. So now I want to cross this little ridge over here, I suppose. So that's going to be a cut, but it should be quite short, so it should be fine. Now again, very high angle, 152 meters. Again, some 3 meters elevation, I suppose. I'm going to go up on the topographic lines and create, let's say, something like this. Now, this cut is actually very nice. Not really that tall at all. Maybe like 2 train heights might be the highest point. And as I said, it's very short. Maybe some retaining walls would be placed there in real life, but obviously depends on the geology of that area. Now, we're going to create one more. Again, very high angle in here, so I kind of don't really need to care much. And I think I want to have it like this, so maybe I'm going to cut into the terrain, actually. I think that I can ascend maybe... Actually, the tangent line is 122. I don't think I can go 3 meters elevation, so let's actually go only 2. Okay? So let's create something like this, right? Now, we created quite a high embankment over here, but as we are cutting into the terrain, it's actually fine, because the earth, or the rocks, or whatever this might be, you know, excavated from the cuts, it would be placed in the embankment. So this is actually quite reasonable. Now, I think I want to create a straight path going right here. I'm gonna see what kind of elevation are we looking for. And we have like a... Also, precision engineering will sometimes give you that yellow line, and it will give you the elevation and distance for it. So you must not confuse it with the elevation and distance that you see on the proposed blue line. See that? If I move it like this, then obviously they are parallel, so it's kind of hard to distinguish between them, but it's obviously the one in the middle all the time. All right, so the distance is some 400 meters. And as you can see, it gives me elevation 4 while going below the terrain 3 meters at the end. So again, kind of cutting into the terrain, but only on one side, which is very nice. Okay, so let's start turning over here. And we're gonna create, oh yeah, sometimes the topographic lines disappear when you do some network construction. Now, as you can see, this curve will actually be almost 90 degrees, and the tangent line is very short. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to clip off that straight segment, because I'm going to be able to now get a nicer, higher curve, right? So right now I have some 108 degrees, almost 300-meter tangent line, so I'm definitely going over that 300-meter mark, all right? Now we're gonna create an elevation. We have the tangent line 276. I think that 400-meter arc length might be in here. So we're gonna go and create quite a tall embankment actually. But this place kind of needs it because it's like a ridgeline between two hills, which is not exactly that tall. So maybe it's going to be fine. And this embankment is not really that high at all. All right, so in here, I think that I need to start turning around this hill, right? So I need to go into a counter curve, and it's probably going to go something like this. So as you can see, it's giving me quite a high elevation. I need to go much lower on the topographic lines. And again, very high angle, so I don't even need to check the radius. And the curve length might be around 400 meters again. So maybe actually close to 5. So yeah, let's go with 5 meters actually. There we go. All right, so continuing on the embankment, making it slightly higher in here, but we are actually going to cut into this hill probably a bit more, so it's going to be fine. Now let's continue. And in here, I think I'm going to create one curve, and I kind of want to aim towards this area because I think I'm going to create a tunnel through that ridge. It's going to be way too high for a cut. All right. So we're going to create some kind of a connection, maybe like this. Now this is quite a big curve. Again, don't really need to check the radius. I'm already seeing that the tangent line is higher than 300. Now the curve length might be approximately 600, 700. So let's go down here maybe. And I'm probably going to have to cut into the terrain already. So yeah, it's probably going to be around 700, I suppose. So let's do it like that. Now we are cutting into the terrain in here quite a lot, and actually from both sides, which may or may not be exactly ideal situation, but you would probably optimize it a bit more in your city. But obviously you might smoothen this terrain out. Doesn't really matter that much. Okay, so let's just do that straight connection from here. And we're gonna do it all the way in here until we get some reasonable elevation. And as you can see, we are already kind of getting very, very high elevations. So I'm going to create like a very short segment maybe in here with going up, let's say, we can do the 4 meters. We have 360 distance, but obviously the game kind of rounds it up. So if you kind of hover between 4 and 3, then you can probably be assured that it's like 3.5 and the game just rounds it up, right? So that should be reasonable. Now what I'm going to do is I need to create the last curve that's going to aim towards the destination in here, okay? So that's going to go roughly like this, maybe. There we go. So let's build it like that and then do a bridge. I'm going to switch it for the bridge already. I obviously don't have the game paused, and I don't want to build a surface segment in here because it would stop the water. So let's do this. And it's actually showing me that the elevation here is quite big, quite bigger than I would like. So I kind of didn't really go all that well when it comes to the elevation. So I'm going to end up a bit lower in this place, but that's all right. It's not going to be that much, and in some later videos I'm going to show you like a more precise way of doing a railroad construction where you might actually precisely do the height at the end. I was kind of doing like a blind build here. All right, so we're gonna switch that for the ground, and in here we're gonna switch the tunnel. All right, so we're probably going to switch it all the way here. Yeah, this is something that you might encounter. Whenever you're going to switch into a tunnel right after a bridge, it creates this. So I'm not sure how I got rid of it. I think just switching it back into a normal segment and then back to the tunnel actually fixes it. So yeah, there you go. And we're gonna just create the tunnel entrance all the way maybe here. Okay, so we created let's say like a half a kilometer tunnel, which is definitely reasonable. Even really old tunnels were definitely possible to be like this. All right, so we created a nice railroad. Unfortunately, we ended up being maybe like, I don't know, 3-4 meters below the desired height, but that's because we were going in kind of blind, and I was following the 1% grade. I could have definitely followed a 1.25, but obviously that's a bit more difficult to calculate from the top of your head. So in some later videos, I'm going to actually use this very railroad to optimize it for like a proper grade, even with all the limitations in curves and all that. But for like a rough build that I completed in 17 minutes actually, it's not so bad. Alright, so let's build the second one. Now, the second one, it's going to be like a variation for maybe a more important railroad. So we're going to maintain higher curve radii and some lower grades. Now, at the beginning of this video, we have measured that distance, like the straight distance to the destination and the elevation as well. And we have seen that the elevation is actually quite high. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to build a new train station for that more important railroad. It's going to be an elevated station, which would definitely be perfectly justified in real life for some kind of a newly built railroad of like a high importance, right? So I know that I want to continue over that part of the river over here. It's not exactly the most narrow point of the river, but since, again, we are building like a more important railroad, it should be justified. We're gonna then continue along the lake, along the mountainside like that, and create like a 2-kilometer tunnel, which again is perfectly fine, all the way to the destination. So I'm going to build that station already, aiming that way. So I don't need to create any curves going from the station and create it perfectly straight. So I roughly want to go into that position. So let's just aim maybe like that. All right. And I'm going to pick like a random station from the workshop, elevated station. I kind of like this one, for example. Obviously, you might use a different one. Now, I'm going to build a straight segment. Obviously, must not forget to switch on the straight slope. I'm going to build it on the surface. And let's just go all the way here. Topographic lines. There we go. All right, so this is like a 1-kilometer stretch. So we can build it very high over here. Maybe just like this. Okay. Now, I'm going to deal with the details in here later, together with the crossing over here. All right. Okay, so let's build a bridge. I think that this embankment over here is a bit too tall. We might already switch it for a bridge just like that. And the bridge is going to obviously continue over the water all the way here. I'm going to put it to the surface and let's see where we can end up with the bridge. It's roughly 800 meters long, so we're going to put it maybe like that. Okay. Now it's kind of tall, but maybe in real life a different bridge type would be built over here. Obviously this is the vanilla one. There are different bridges in the workshop you might experiment with, so you might make it much nicer. Now I think that I want to create a one curve with reasonably high radius over here. I'm not so sure if this is going to give me a nice cut and an embankment over here, but I might try and see what happens. I'm gonna switch it back to the surface, and I kind of want to go over here. Now in here I definitely have a reasonably high curve radii already, and I want to go to the elevation of at least maybe like 5 meters. Okay, so maybe I'm going to aim towards probably this point. Okay, so in here, what do we have in here? We kind of have a very deep cut, although in real life there would probably be some kind of a retaining wall. Again, depends on the geology, obviously. If this was some kind of a granite rock face, then maybe it would be fine. Maybe just slightly more angled. Now, this embankment looking all right. It's kind of high on the high side, but it's not really that big of a deal because we're going to create a tunnel, which is going to be some 2 kilometers long, which means that all the rock excavated from the tunnel would be used for these kinds of embankments, together with obviously these cuts over here. So it should be all right. Now I think I'm going to continue. I'm going to continue with a straight segment over here, which is going to probably be like 500 meters long. We might build it maybe just like that. Okay, that's actually a very nicely built railroad, not really cutting into the cliff side all that much, or the hillside. All right, so now I think I'm going to already finish this by just building one curve and like a straight segment all the way to the destination. Now again, just like we did in the beginning with the train station and the crossing, I'm going to use the gravel road, and I'm kind of going to get that point where the railroad kind of starts doing the curve or stops the curve. It's going to be inside the tunnel probably, but I still want to make it nice, even though it's going to be invisible. So we're going to build like a short, well, actually not that short, like a straight segment of the gravel, helping road like that. And using the freeform, I'm going to see where we are going to meet underneath. So it's probably going to be over here, let's say. Gonna mark that location and flip off this part over here. Now again, I'm kind of going to eyeball what portion of the curve is, or what portion of the overall distance is the curve, and I think it's probably like 1/3 again. So I'm gonna get the distance to that destination, and it's 19 meters. Now that divided by 3 would be around 6, let's say. Maybe just a bit over 6. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get this height, 321.19, and I'm going to put those 6 meters there more. So I'm just going to type in 7. There we go. So it's from 321 we go to 327. And I'm going to paint that height over here. I don't really need to be all that precise here, obviously just going to paint the entire area and put it back later. Alright, so we can destroy this all the way to the destination. Now pick a railroad and build it properly all the way there. I'm still using the straight, well actually the surface type, because then I'm going to switch it to the tunnel. Alright, and we're going to build the tunnel easily just like that. It's going to give me 79.2, but I'm actually going to do this because it's going to be, you know, underground in the tunnel, so it should be fine, okay? And it's barely visible that there is like a slight inconsistency there, okay? Now we can take the landscaping tool, hit Ctrl Z, put this back. Now we're going to switch it for the tunnel. So let's start maybe over there probably, and let's just go all the way to the destination. Now over here we are kind of going close to the surface. We might actually split that tunnel in 2 segments, but we don't really need to. Creating tunnels of like 2.5, 3 kilometer distance is perfectly fine, even for not all that very important railroad in today's age. But even like 100 years ago, creating very long tunnels was actually fine. People definitely knew how to do it, and especially for railroad was perfectly fine, especially in difficult terrain like this one. All right, so we are done. We created the second variation of the railroad for maybe like a more important trains, for definitely higher speeds. And the trains going over this railroad are definitely going to reach their destination in much shorter time. So now we're going to go back here and just do some tiny details. So for example, going to that train station, I might switch this railroad to be just a bit elevated here. And since this railroad is a bit more important, we kind of can't afford to have one level crossings here. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to switch this road for elevated, and then just move it above and create a nice little bridge over that railroad. Okay, obviously you would do it much better. I just did it quickly. All right, so that was the second variant of the railroad, just like this. All right, so those were the 2 examples. I kind of built it roughly, quickly, but I think as a build example, it is enough. The point of this video was to show you how to practically follow the radius and grade requirements, which obviously makes the railroad more realistic. The second railroad might seem a bit too much. I didn't respect the terrain and built a tunnel almost on half of the entire railroad. It definitely is possible to have a railroad like that in real life. I personally would not build it like that in my city purely because of the fact that I want to see my trains go, so hiding them underground is bad for me. But obviously that argument has nothing to do with realism. But this is still just a game, so you usually find a balance between realism and personal taste, obviously. Anyway, to complete this guide, we still need to go over the speed limits, especially in curves, and talk some more about a few design principles. Then I want to take the railroad I built first in this video and make it more precise using a different building method, which might be quite interesting to you, although it will be a bit more complicated. If you have any questions or suggestions, maybe you'd like to see me explain something more related to railroads in this game, just post a comment down below, and if you're new here, feel free to subscribe to the channel. Thank you guys for watching, hopefully it's been helpful to you, and I'll see you in the next one.